Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and each week I'm joined by Husky Harry, huggable homos who love film, to talk about something near and dear to our heart. That, of course, being movies. It's so important. It's in the title of our show. As usual, I'm joined by my wonderful co-hosts, both of which are in the same state now, while I am alone in Arizona.
Right.
Jim Poliafico is traveling for work. Babe, how is Texas?
The great state of Texas is fine. I've been here maybe a couple of hours already, but I've been here enough. I mean, both to this area and Austin, and there are areas of the state I haven't been to, but I'm pretty familiar with both. I'm in the Dallas area now, and of course we'll be back in Texas in less than a month. Less than a month, yeah. So it's kind of crazy, but a lot of Texas time.
Indeed. And Will Lindis is here with us as well, also coming from Texas. Will, how are you?
Hey there, movie boys, movie girls, movie Brad, movie Jim. So glad to be back with you tonight as we answer the age-old question. What's a butt plug?
Right.
Oh, goodness. We've got a fun question mark show for you guys tonight. As Will alluded, we're going to be talking about the 50 Shades phenomenon. We're not reviewing the newest 50 Shades movie, but now that the trilogy has wrapped, we're going to be talking a little bit about the phenomenon that is 50 Shades. Is it a good thing? Is it maybe not a good thing? What do we think? We'd love to hear your thoughts too. Definitely feel free to jump in via our live chat. Let us know your thoughts. We'll be happy to read them on air, assuming they are YouTube appropriate. We'll also be reviewing the Cloverfield Paradox, the newest Cloverfield film in the Cloverfield franchise.
Paradox? What?
Paradox?
Cloverfield Paradox?
Hey, I would watch that movie.
I would most definitely watch that. In fact, I would build a time machine, go back, and I would watch that instead. But I'm getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah. I would love to see a giant Peridot stomping around going, "You clods!" Anyway, Steven Universe jokes. Steven Universe jokes for any of those who are not aware. Jim, I love that we can make Steven Universe jokes with you now, and you were the source of that joke. So
I was.
I've got a nerd boner right now.
Chalk that one up for me. Yeah.
Jim's in the Cool Kids Club now. We have invited you to our Cool Kids Steven Universe clubhouse, and
Steven Universe.
Yeah, you're part of the Steven Universe.
There you go. We believe in Steven. Anyway, we've got a lot to talk about tonight, but before we do, I want to give a quick shout out to those who are joining us in the live chat. We are very glad to see you guys. We've got a few folks already. Sammy W, who says we should name the show the Butt Plug Paradox.
I'm down with that.
Butt Plug Paradox.
Right. It's in stone. It's unchangeable. This episode is now the Butt Plug Paradox. I don't care what other ideas come up. That's just too good.
I had originally titled the episode 50 Shades of Cloverfield, but I think the Butt Plug Paradox is a little better.
It wins. It wins so hard.
Hard. And Austin Glenn is here with us as well. Welcome, Austin. Glad to have you here. Guys, there's so much to talk about. Are we ready to just, I hesitate to say dive right into the Butt Plug Paradox, but are you ready to talk?
If this conversation gets too intense, do we have a safe word?
I think the safe word is butt plug.
Well, see, that's hard. That's a tough one because it's like, hey, can you hand me that butt plug? It's like, oh crap, I don't know if we're supposed to slow down the conversation or if this is about to get really, really interesting. So I don't know. Well, I
was thinking maybe we could end the show early tonight, but plugs are an important part of what we do, so we should probably keep them.
Really good, really good. In fact, let's just rename that section of our show the butt plug section, like because it comes right there at the end.
Oh my god!
Hopefully,
guys, our do I have your consent to begin our 50 Shades discussion?
I've read all 67 pages. I've signed and given full consent.
Mm-hmm. Jim, I need your consent too, or we may not proceed.
You have my consent. Yes, you do. I do. I will follow the exit rules, the exit seat rules on this flight. Yes.
All right. Well, then here we go. Our discussion of the 50 Shades phenomenon. All right. So let's kick this mother effer into high gear and talk a little bit about 50 Shades. So, Will, I know you've seen one of the movies, and I know we've kind of talked through a lot of this stuff. We saw the latest movie. In fact, we watched all 3 movies, right, babe, over this last weekend.
Yeah, I watched these 3 movies, and I did manage to squeeze into my tight schedule another few movies too. So it was a pretty good movie weekend.
Right on.
We had some friends who had never seen them before, and they wanted to go see the newest one with us. So we got together and we watched them, and it was interesting. I was all ready to like die laughing with them, and they were like seriously into them. They were like crying at certain parts of the movie. I was like, wow, this is okay. All right. But let me do this. Let's just kind of open this up with a bit of a education, if you will. So 50 Shades of Grey was a series of novels that came out several years ago, sort of normalized ? Some housewives who dream of BDSM activities, maybe coming out of the closet with that a little bit. And we started to see other movies and TV shows and pop culture things picking up 50 Shades and sort of making that part of the cultural zeitgeist. What do you guys think of 50 Shades sort of becoming this like crazy popular worldwide phenomenon?
Well, I mean, it's as you mentioned, Brad, it's a series of erotic, like romance novels, I guess, and the writer is E.L. James, I guess, who's British, and it's a typical like hetero romance that you would find in these romance novels. Typically, it's kind of too unmatched or different kinds of people that come together, and they seem to be mainly written, and that's not to say that males will not read these, but they seem to be, their target audience seems to be primarily female, primarily kind of females who, and this is kind of like their kind of fantasy softcore porn. And this one is interesting because and I haven't read a lot of romance novels, but this one brings in kind of a heavy dose of what at least this author prescribes to as BDSM play, right? Definitely a kink or fetish angle to the romance and the sexual play between the two partners. But yeah, so that's kind of the setup, and I think it's interesting. But then again, I don't have a vast knowledge of romance novels, and if this kind of stuff filters into those from time to time, kind of fetish or kink angles factors into it. But this one definitely did, and this is what the series has kind of been come to be known as, is it's that movie with the BDSM stuff in it.
Yeah, this franchise is very, very difficult to talk about without thinking about just all of the elephants that are very obviously in the room. First of all, this is a film that is based on a book series that was remarkably popular. And so I think no matter where you come down on this, either this film franchise as a piece of films, as individual films, which I'm not high on them, or how you look at them in terms of how they portray BDSM culture, I'm not very high on the way they do those. You have to still give them credit for being that popular. And what I mean by that is it is obviously striking a chord with an audience. then it's filling some sort of need that people have. And I think about where it comes from, right? This is a as Jim mentioned, it's a romance series. It's like it's an erotic literature series that's been turned to film, and a lot of those, the trappings are less important than the erotic tension. And I think that's the case. I think that's why 50 Shades is popular, less so because of their use of whips or their use of any of the individual devices in the red room or whatever. It's because there's a tension between the two. There's a yearning between what's her name, Anastasia, and Christian. Both have wants and desires. Think about like when you think about a romance novel and it's like a stable boy and like a debutante or something like that, kind of set against like the West. No one cares if they get the portrayal of like, did she describe whether or not that saddle was put on accurately? No one gives a fuck. It's more about like, the tension between the two characters. And I think that's probably where some of this is going to. So yeah, does, the original questions, does this help to normalize BDSM culture? I don't know that it necessarily does, because I don't know that this film series cares enough about BDSM culture. And I don't know that the audience necessarily cares enough about BDSM culture. I think it's a trapping, but I don't think that it's at the core of this film. It's about a woman who is in this weird power dynamic, which yes, is part of BDSM. But again, I think it's wearing the clothes of it and not actually kind of living the world of it, if that makes sense.
It definitely does. I think the only issue that I take with that is this series of books and now these films are sort of an entry vehicle into this world, right? And so I think what happens is people read these books, they see these movies, maybe it piques an interest, which is great. There's a lot of cool stuff in the BDSM world to be explored and have fun with. The problem is the things in that world often go hand in hand with important things like, consent and being safe and sane. And, these movies and these books perpetuate a lot of really bad things that in the real BDSM community would be like huge red flags. Like,
oh yeah.
In the first movie, Christian Grey is like a fucking stalker.
Yeah, we should mention we may spoil some things in the movies if we talk about certain examples. Yeah.
Oh, good point. Yeah, we're probably not going to go into like deep spoilers, and I can't spoil anything from 2 and 3 anyway. But yeah, I mean, we're obviously going to be talking about some of the behaviors, and so there is the potential to spoil some things. But yeah, go right ahead, Brett.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, he's practically a stalker. He he's getting into her bank account and he's like tracking her location with her phone to show up at a bar she's at. He's selling her car without her consent. Like, there's all kinds of crazy stuff there, but also too, like, there's this whole notion of like, oh, we have a contract. We've got to follow this contract. What's your decision on the contract? And then, we find out that she's a nubile virgin. She's new to everything. And he's like, well, fuck the contract. We don't need paperwork. And, they go at it. And so it's kind of like you have people seeing and holding these books and films up now as sort of like the example to follow, as opposed to necessarily recognizing that, like you said, Will, it's kind of like BDSM in sheep's clothing. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So that's kind of the thing that I wrestle about with them.
And it's a fair thing to wrestle with because, and again, I need to lampshade almost everything I say with maybe in parts 2 and part 3, they get a lot better and a lot more progressive and a lot more well written. But the first one, which was where I checked out of the series, Christian Grey is a sadist. This is a guy who uses his relationship to like satiate this like primal lust for abuse, like in an actual like dom submissive relationship, which is what we've got here. The submissive has as much control as the dominant has, just not inside of the, but outside of the necessarily headspace stuff. I guess what I'm saying is it's both people come to the table in those types of relationships understanding where their roles are, how they fit, and everything that they do, even if it's like kind of stripping someone down, it's within the confines of what both people want in that moment. That's not what happens here. You know, you mentioned like the stalkery stuff where he would show up. There's some spots where they, in that first film, they engage in some rough play that is not consensual. Like, she is not there for it. And I even take it a step further and would say, even the things that she does consent to, it's a weird type of consent because she's not actually, at least from the first one, she doesn't seem excited or interested in any of the things that he's putting out there. She's interested in him. And so she's consenting to do things that she's not interested in so that she can be in a relationship with someone that she wants to be in a relationship with. And so it's a kind of a weird, uneven level of consent that is not at all in line or jiving with what should happen in a proper, healthy BDSM relationship. So you're absolutely right, Brad. This is a thing to wrestle with in terms of, like, there are some people who probably think that this is what, this is what kink is. And it's not. This is, I mean... And it's especially frustrating because there are better films that tackle this same topic. You know, we've mentioned Secretary, we've mentioned Duke of Burgundy on this show, and all of those, portray both kind of, also some of the pitfalls that kind of come with those things. But I just struggle with the idea that someone would come across this franchise and say, this is healthy, this is normal, this is something that I want to engage in this same particular way. I trust people. I give people a little bit of credit. Most of the people that I've talked to that are not part of BDSM culture and are big fans of the book, I've talked to them. I've asked them, like, how do you feel about this stuff? And all of the feedback I've gotten is like, Christian Grey is a creep, but I still like the romantic tension between them. And so I guess I trust people to see it for what it is. But at the same time, I do worry that someone is going to get involved in something that they're not comfortable with because they think that's how it's done. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can somewhat agree with most of those points. I think this movie, though, could be a good jumping off point for people. I mean, when we go to these movies, we see a lot of couples in the audience, right, who go to see these movies together. And I would imagine in the BDSM culture or whatever, there may be couples out there who either one or both partners have some kind of latent interest in some of these activities. And they see these movies as maybe this could be a jumping off point. And you're right, there is some stuff in the first movie, toward the end of the first movie. And Brad and I have had a big discussion about this thing where it's not where she doesn't give consent, but she gives consent in kind of a weird way. Like, there's some weird tension going on between them. And
Jim,
so
just to clarify, you're talking about where she's like, show me how bad it could be, Christian. I need to know. Absolutely. Like, abuse me as much as you can.
Yes. And she's doing it out of anger, I think, to maybe teach them, to kind of teach him a lesson. And, he follows through with it. And it's very uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable. But back to my point is, I think a lot of people could still see this because there is a lot of the play that they have that is mostly harmless play, and I think to straight couples would be very very sensual and very at least if you look at the trilogy overall. I don't recall anything, Brad, that looked like, and maybe we can get into some of this, but that looked particularly heinous. There was, like I said, that one scene in the first movie that made a lot of people uncomfortable. But I think that couples go because they have this curiosity. And typically, like I said, one partner or the other might have more of an interest or have more knowledge of it and wants to bring the other partner in. There's always kind of this strange dynamic where maybe the couples are not on equal footing, just like in the movie. Obviously, he's this uber Will, you mentioned the word sadist, which was interesting because later on in the series of films, it actually comes up.
he admits we gave ourselves spoiler permission.
Yeah.
He tells her, "I'm actually not a dominant. I'm a sadist."
Yeah, so he actually comes to terms with him, and this trilogy is really a journey for both of them, which I kind of enjoyed about it. I mean, yeah, there's plenty of like clumsy stuff that doesn't work in these movies, but I do like the overall progression and arc of this relationship and how they change as individuals. Especially Anna and even Christian to some degree. So
you mean the ultimate pussification of Christian Grey?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, the power does shift from what seems to be a very uncomfortable and dangerous power imbalance in the first movie to something that's much more equal by the end of the series, which I give the series full credit for kind of making that happen. I don't know what happens in the books. I don't know. I assume it's similar, but I'm not sure. So yeah, and Brad, I know you're probably going to want to get into other points regarding, because I'm not part of the BDSM culture, but there may be some specific things that or examples as to why you feel this is more damaging than good. But I don't know if I see it that way. If people can use this as kind of a stepping point, not an ABC how-to, but like a launching point into ways to explore their relationships, I say that's good.
I think anything can be useful from that particular context, like from the standpoint of, okay, I want to process and think about what I just saw and understand why it was good and why it was bad and kind of use that to make a more informed decision. I think that's a fine way of looking at just about anything. If I look at this as a direct primer, then that's where I have a lot more issue. Right. Because even in the example that you gave with the she's, I want to see how hard it can be and sort of lashing out in anger. A good dominant, a healthy dominant is going to stop that play right then and right there because the person is not in the right emotional space to get into that headspace.
Right.
And so the fact that he proceeded with it is actually manipulative / abusive for him to have done so. And it puts her in an incredibly unsafe position. Not only within the play itself, but also within the emotional state, because when, as a submissive can be stripped down and can be emotionally damaged by a dominant who doesn't understand what they're doing. And so that's where I worry. That's where I worry.
Yeah. I mean, that's especially problematic because even in that first movie, he knows that she's a virgin. He knows that she's doting on his every word and, is reluctantly agreeing to some of this stuff just to be with him, but he carries on anyway. And then he uses sex and love to emotionally and physically manipulate her into agreeing to these things. And I think that's really dangerous in some ways. Also, too, a true submissive has all the power in the relationship and loans that power out to the dominant to use for both of their mutual gratification. And then, they get their power back unless it's like a 24/7 thing. But again, it's all consensual, right? It's all consent-based. One of the big problems here is it sort of sets this precedent that, like, if you agree to be a submissive to a dominant, then you have to do pretty much whatever they want, unless it's something you called out in a contract that you wouldn't do, which, is not a great precedent to set. The sub can take their power back at any time. And then also, too, I think it just, some subs will say, I really want to, do BDSM stuff. Okay, great. What do you want to do? Whatever Sir wants me to do. Oh, really? Whatever. There's so many crazy things, out there that are part of BDSM that are not even in these books. I recently discovered that some people like to be, cut with knives and scissors as part of very extreme BDSM culture. Or maybe I want you to come wash my fucking car. Doesn't even involve sex, right? But people read these books and see these movies and they think, oh, the role of the submissive is to do whatever the dominant wants. and they're robbing themselves, I think, of their own power and potentially putting themselves in unsafe situations. So I think that's a big concern.
Yeah, and I don't want to come across too much of a like I'm clutching my pearls with these movies at all, because I think that I do trust the average. Let me back up.
The average Christian and Anna.
I need I don't know if I actually do, but I need to be able to trust the average person to watch fictional works and to be able to extrapolate correctly from them. You know, if you watch a movie about revenge murders, I trust that you're not going to go like, yeah, great, I need to go grab my knife and start chopping people up. You know, and so I trust people that because I do know that it's, you know, slippery slope. You know, I think back to all of the video games are what cause shootings, and Marilyn Manson is what causes kids to be terrible. Like, I remember all of those arguments, and I don't want to think that the 50 Shades movies are going to be a direct link to harm. They could be, but anything could be if interpreted wrong. But I do want to, like, you know, I think if we're having this conversation, I think the conversation should be, hey, if you enjoy these movies, enjoy these movies. If you enjoy the romantic tension between these characters, cool. If you enjoy kind of the super vanilla BDSM that they engage in until it becomes creepy and sadistic, cool, go for it and enjoy these things. I want you to like films. I want, you know, even if I don't. But I do want the conversation to also be sort of with a little asterisks there. Like, but if we are talking about this as the pillar for the BDSM community, I think we need to talk about the ways where it is not truly reflective of that type of culture and those types of relationships, or at least when done correctly. It's the same thing I would say if we watched a bunch of, like, you know, we're an LGBTQ podcast. If we watched a bunch of films that had what we considered to be offensive or incorrect views of gay life, you know, like us, you know, like nothing but gay characters who were overly pronounced and overly stereotyped and only kind of played off of one particular thing, we would be raising our hands and saying, like, okay, can we see ourselves reflected more accurately? And, you know, can we see ourselves in loving relationships as human beings with actual wants and desires instead of like paper thin caricatures? And I think the BDSM community probably deserves a little bit better than this being sort of this shining beacon of what BDSM is.
Oh, yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Like I said, I think they just kind of, I think they touch on it enough to maybe get people interested. Maybe they take some missteps in terms of how it's used in the movie and in the relationship. And I would argue, and I'm sure there's an argument to be made for who really has the power in the relationship as these movies evolve. Or maybe even from the beginning, you know, and we could get into that. There's a power dynamic on several different levels, and I'm not sure that he's driving the train on all of them.
And that's a question I have for the two of you, because I can only judge off of the first movie, and in the first movie, I never really felt like she was in a position of power. She was always sort of chasing his needs and his desires, and he was steering everything, and a lot of times in bad places. I think there's a spot at the end of the movie where she tries to reclaim some power, but it's so too little. It
doesn't last very long.
Yeah,
but she is exercising that power, and there's a great scene in the first movie. It's kind of like a meeting or a boardroom scene, which I thought was one of the better scenes in the whole trilogy, where you could sense that she understands internally that he doesn't have all the power and she has some power. And I think that starts to open her up to the idea of how, as a submissive, she could wield some power in the relationship. I think that scene is really great.
I do question how well she's able to understand what's happening contractually during that scene, because that is where she mutters that infamous line, at least for me, what's a butt plug? As someone
exactly.
who's unsure completely of what the concept of a plug and how it might fit into that.
I'm pretty
but
sure
go ahead, Brad. I'm sorry.
Pretty sure that's for the audience.
I was just going to say, I mean, I was totally on board with that scene. I thought it was great. And I guess I would have liked to have seen her come to her own terms with this contract and sort of like willingly like sign it and agree to it. Instead, she doesn't. And Christian decides, oh, fuck the paperwork. And they just go into it anyway. And he uses like physical and emotional manipulation into making her his submissive anyway. So yeah, she maybe tries to assert some of her own power there, but I mean, he divests her of it pretty quickly. But Jim, I mean, I do agree with you having seen the other two movies. I don't want to spoil too heavily, but the power exchange does become a little more equalized.
Yes.
She even starts to drive some of the DS stuff in a way. I have some issues with that too, but that's way too spoilery. But I mean, as a romance thing with some BDSM flavor, I think it works. I guess the analogy I would use is it's like when you go to like a mom and pop ice cream shop and they have little tasting spoons for each of their flavors, right? You can get a little taste of it, but before you thunk down $10.75 for a pint, maybe you want to like read the board and see everything that's in it and do a little bit of research. Is this good to put in your body before you choose to like really buy into the whole thing? If that makes sense.
You very much so.
Or you buy it, have 2 spoonfuls, and throw it away.
Yeah, there's that too. In any event, I do think it's cool though, that, you know, for good or bad, this series of books and film have given a voice in a way to people who are kind of curious about BDSM culture. It's given them a vehicle for starting to kind of explore some of that. Hopefully they're doing a lot more reading, researching, and talking to people who are experienced in the community to kind of get the real deal, right? But BDSM used to be one of those things that like you absolutely did not talk about, or you would be labeled like a social, you know, pariah. One of the things the movie does is it also perpetuates a stereotype that, you know, dominants are dominant because they were abused and now they're acting out. Hopefully people aren't really buying into that, right? But I think it's cool that it's making it part of the discussion. I'll never forget a couple years ago, one of my coworkers, of all things, in a work chat was like, "Oh my gosh, the new 50 Shades movie is coming out. I can't wait." And I was like hesitant to say anything. And she's like, "I hope they get flogging right in this movie because it was wrong in the first one." And I'm like,
damn.
Okay, all right. This is happening.
Karen from HR is into some shit,
you know? So speaking of something funny, Jim, I told you this story already, but Will, I wanted to relate this to you. So we're in the final movie. There's some pretty, you know, crazy sex scenes happening. And this woman sitting to my left at the end of every sex scene gets up, leaves for 10 minutes, comes back smelling like cigarette smoke. So it's almost like she's going out to have a cigarette after every sex scene.
Oh, wow.
And then the credits are rolling and she gets up to leave and she's like shining her phone's flashlight on her seat. And the girl next to her is like, "Mom, did you like lose something? What are you doing?" And she's like, "Oh, I'm just making sure the seat didn't get wet, honey."
That is wonderful and also gross, but also so funny. I mean,
it was crazy.
We made those same jokes around the time the first one came out that, you know, they were gonna cover all of the seats with like plastic just so they could spray them off afterwards.
Yeah.
But I get it. Like, I think that you know, this is a series of films that does appeal to a demographic that wants kind of the forbidden romance, that wants kind of their eroticism to be a little dangerous and a little titillating, but not too dangerous and not too subversive. And I think this film tries to stay in that lane, and I think that's why it opens some of the conversations that it does. And I think that's also why it gets some of the things wrong that it does, is because its audience is not a BDSM audience. Its audience is for people that might be titillated by the idea of a BDSM romance, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's what I was saying earlier. It's kind of like the jumping off point. And to Brad's point, that's where they would maybe, if they're interested in stuff like that, that's where they would maybe start to do some research, or, you know, read a good book on the topic, or you know, find a video somewhere or something.
Hopefully not read bad books on the topic.
Yeah. No, I mean a good book about the different aspects of BDSM culture and activities. Yeah.
If I wrote a BDSM book, I would want it to be bound in leather.
Oh,
no, wouldn't that be awesome? Like, you know, it's like you're leather bound with like straps. Like, you know, this is your BDSM book.
Has a strap to open it.
Yeah. See. In fact, I would even call the book "Bound in Leather."
There you go. Well,
see,
get on it.
All right, I've written a title. I've written literally 3 words. I am on my way towards being a New York Times bestseller.
There you go. All right. Well, it's been an interesting discussion with regards to the 50 Shades phenomenon. Whether it gets it right, whether it gets it wrong, it has become part of pop culture. You remember that show we were watching on HBO for a little while, Togetherness, with Mark Duplass and Melanie Linsky?
Yes.
So that show opens, spoilers for Togetherness, that show like opens with Melanie Linsky like diddling herself to 50 Shades. And, you know, it's just interesting to me.
Masturbating,
popping
in
up,
other words.
Masturbating. To see it like just popping up as often as it does. So my last question for you guys, and then we're going to move on to our Cloverfield discussion, but the book trilogy is over. Do you think the movie trilogy or the movie franchise is over at this point? Or do you think they'll keep cashing in on this cash cow?
For me personally, it makes very little difference because I've probably seen as many of them as I'm going to see. I wouldn't be surprised if they do basically the equivalent of Fantastic Beasts with this one, where it's like, all right, we finished up our Harry Potter 8 film series. Now let's start a 7 film Fantastic Beasts. You know, so maybe we'll see I know there's some stuff that apparently happened with Christian in the past. I don't know how much they go into it in those other 2, but maybe they do a prequel with like young Christian, or
you know, that'd be uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe that's where they go. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if they kept going with it. Also, I wouldn't be surprised if this is it though, because I think I read somewhere, and I could be wrong. Maybe I am. Don't the 2 leads like absolutely hate each other? Like, I think
they
really. That was a interesting. That was a story that broke either during the first or second movie, where supposedly they had a hard time getting them to.
Maybe they're better now, yeah.
To relate on the set to each other or whatever. I don't know. Yeah, possibly.
Yeah. So, I mean, that could be a thing that kept them from, like, you know, if either of them is just like, you know, I've had enough. I want to do other things with my career. I don't want to be in just this series of films forever and ever. I think if either of those 2 characters doesn't come back for it, it becomes a harder sell to, like, kind of like, I don't know, create some sort of side story within the fiction. So I think it all depends on, like, the willingness of the leads to keep inhabiting these characters.
Yeah, to answer the question, I think for me, it seemed. I mean, we saw the last movie. It seemed like they put a capstone on it. Doesn't mean there isn't possibilities for something else, but I didn't get the impression that it was, you know, wide open for the next chapter. They seemed to come to a resolution and some kind of equilibrium in the relationship, and you know, life has kind of gone on from the young Anna and Christian dynamic. Also, you know, like we said, I'd like to see the actors maybe do something else. It's funny. There's a scene in the 3rd movie, and we're used to seeing this Christian character, and he's very, you know, he's pretty uptight, pretty like laser focused on whatever is in front of him, whether it's Anna or their playtime or the business or building a house or whatever. But there's a scene where he actually comes home intoxicated in one of the scenes. And it was kind of a shocker to see Jamie Dornan play a character that it's like he stepped out of his character to be the drunk Christian Grey. And it was kind of awesome to see, like, oh, wow, this guy maybe could do something in another role if he didn't have to be, button down Christian Grey. So, I'd like to see both actors go do something else. I don't really want to see them drag this on really any longer. I do sort of enjoy these movies for what they are, and I prefer to kind of leave them as they are and not drag it out.
All right. Well, we're gonna lock 50 Shades of Grey up in the playroom forevermore. Maybe. We'll see. Who knows? Maybe it'll come back at some point, but we're going to go ahead and shift gears. We have a movie to review. Guys, how do you feel about moving on to the Cloverfield Paradox?
Yeah, let's do it. We haven't had enough, alternate reality stuff going on, so let's get into it.
While we're on the subject of masochism, let's talk about the Cloverfield Paradox.
Let's punish ourselves. In any event, hey, if you haven't seen the Cloverfield Paradox yet, that's probably because it just dropped during the Super Bowl. Maybe you haven't had a chance to check it out yet. No worries. We're going to talk about the movie completely spoiler-free for probably the first 10 or 15 minutes. We give you our recommendations on whether we think it's worth checking out on Netflix, and then we'll give you a fair warning before we open that can of spoiler worms. But all of that said, here we go, our discussion of the Cloverfield Paradox. All right, so Will, why don't you kick us off here? What the fuck is this whole Cloverfield thing, and how does this movie fit in? Is it worth checking out? What do you think?
Yeah, so the Cloverfield Paradox. The first thing you need to know about this film is that it's come to us via one of the most interesting and revolutionary marketing stunts that I've probably ever seen. This film we knew it was coming out sometime this year. We knew that, J.J. Abrams and his crew snatched up a film called The God Particle that was still in the script stage and rewrote it to be the Cloverfield Paradox. What we didn't know was release date. So on Super Bowl Sunday, and are we supposed to call it the Super Bowl? Can we call it? Do we have to call it the big game? I don't know if the NFL is going to sue us or not. Let's just pretend. So
I'm not afraid of the fucking
on
NFL.
The big game Sunday. They launched the trailer for it. The first real trailer for it happens during the game, with basically the buzz being that that it is going to immediately be released on Netflix at the end of the game. So the trailer launched 2-3 hours before the film was available to be seen, and it basically was this crazy marketing that let millions of people get kind of excited about your movie that's just going to be a random thing that's showing up on Netflix. So wonderful marketing for what ends up being a not great film. This particular movie is about this group of scientists, and it's a very diverse group of scientists from a variety of different countries. Earth is facing this energy crisis, so they are sent up into space with the idea that they're going to be creating this basically super powered laser, for lack of a better word. We'll get into some more of the details in a moment, to try to help in the energy crisis. And in doing so, something goes drastically wrong, and the scientists have to survive and try to get back home. I left the last part super spoiler light. First, the good. This movie has an amazing cast. Some of the people that were tapped here are real, maybe not necessarily heavy hitters, although some of them are, but they are all people who I have quite enjoyed in things and was really excited to see here. Like the lead here is Gugu Mbatha-Raw, who we saw in Belle a few years ago, and of course in San Junipero, which we cannot get enough of talking about because it's so damn good. Chris O'Dowd is in this. David Oyelowo, Daniel Bruhl, Ziyi Zhang, and a few others as well. And I kind of have to leave it about there in terms of like things that I really liked. I think this cast was really good. The script is not great at all. There's some real story issues, some of which come from probably the source material itself, some of which come from the way the Cloverfield stuff is shoved into this particular movie. So you can definitely tell where things were kind of Frankenstein to create whatever Abrams' final vision was. And it doesn't do the story any favors. Some of the more, because this is kind of a space horror, space terror type thing, you can almost be able to track all of the movies that it borrows heavily from and say, yeah, and it did the original films do them so much better. Like you can say, like, yeah, this movie is like if you take this, that, and then strip them of all their personality, but put them together, that's what you end up getting. I did not like this movie, and that sucks because I really liked the first Cloverfield. I really, really liked 10 Cloverfield Lane. I was really excited to watch this after the Super Bowl because I was hoping this series would be 3 for 3, but nope, it's pretty damn bad, and I get why this was released on Netflix. Good on them for marketing it super well, but bad on them for making this piece of shit.
Oh boy. All right. That is a big hearty not recommend from Will. Jim, you watched this movie on your flight today, so I'm sure it's fresh in your mind.
3 or 4 hours ago, yeah.
Where do you come down?
Yeah, let me see. I don't have the white hot hate for this movie that Will has. Hi, are you guys there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I lost my screen there for a second. Sorry, guys. But yeah, this movie was not good. And Will, I think the problems, as you said, are pretty much in the script and the story. This movie felt like you said, like had elements of a lot of other better science fiction stories in there. I was fine with the cast. I mean, as a generic sci-fi space movie, I thought this was fine. It has very, very loose tie-ins to this whole Cloverfield universe thing is really kind of getting on my nerves. It's really just a bunch of like anthology type stories that are set supposedly in this Cloverfield event universe, which is really, really vague, and it's not very cohesive. So if you're expecting like a sequel prequel kind of relationship between these movies, throw that out the window because it really doesn't hang together. And that's really not a knock. It's just tempering expectations. There's some Cloverfield stuff that's thrown into this movie that I'm scratching my head like, what the fuck was that in the movie for? Like, this should have been a non-Cloverfield movie, if you ask me. Instead of trying to make it part of this, I think maybe it was marketing and somebody said, oh, we have this idea for a movie, but hey, maybe if we throw a couple of Cloverfield things in there, it'll be cooler. And we release it on Netflix right after the Super Bowl. We say it's coming soon, but really it's coming that night. It was just really strange. To me, it was okay. It was like it reminded me a lot of the movie Life that we saw a couple years ago,
definitely.
Which wasn't a very good movie. I had a good cast, could have been a good premise. It kind of made all the same mistakes story wise, and we'll get into spoilers. I didn't hate this movie. I just don't think it's going to be very memorable. And that's too bad. It seemed to have no personality or charisma on its own. It tried to borrow from a lot of different films, made this Frankenstein monster of a space movie, which was, mildly enjoyable in parts, but really didn't hang together. Yeah, I'm right on the fence on this one. I didn't like it all that. I mean, I didn't hate it, but it passed the time on an airplane, and that was fine to me. I was kind of interested as to where it was going to go. By the time it got there at the end, I wasn't that interested anymore, and I was scratching my head like, where did it go and why?
So Jim's review is, well, I needed something to last an hour and 45 minutes, and I can confirm that it did indeed last an hour and 45 minutes.
Right. Hey, it was under 2 hours, which is a bonus half a star for me every time.
There you go. So, Jim, just to clarify, is this recommend, not recommend?
I would well, here's the thing. If you have Netflix and you can watch it for free and you're kind of like, you got to see every science fiction thing out there, go ahead and watch it. You're not going to pay extra money for it, so grab it now. I would not go out of your way to go watch this, though, if you have other stuff on your list.
All right. Gotcha. Well, let's turn things over to Ben Stark, who is in our live chat with us. Ben says, Cloverfield Paradox was an okay space adventure movie. Not great, but okay. Jim, that seems very in line with what you're saying here. Ben says, as a continuation of the Cloverfield world, though, it just fell apart. And I have to say, I think that's the issue that I have with this film as well. I was not a huge fan of the original Cloverfield movie. Part of that was because I think the shaky cam made me really sick when I saw it in theaters. I went back later, watched it on home video, and took some Dramamine. I was fine. But the second movie I really liked, 10 Cloverfield Lane, I thought was great. This movie, I was kind of trying to figure out like where it fit into the spectrum. Like, is it in the future? Is it in the past? Is it happening concurrently? And I think we kind of got an answer that we can talk about in spoilers. But I felt like this was like a non-Cloverfield movie right up until like they shoehorn in how it's a Cloverfield movie. And I think that's really disappointing in a way when you're franchise building like this. And you can see the seams like that. That's a real problem. As space horror thrillers go, there were definitely some things that I did really like. There's some cool stuff happening with regards to like, gosh, I don't want to spoil, but just like weird, shit that goes down. The laws of physics go out the window. We start messing around a little bit with different realities. That stuff really fascinates the fuck out of me. So I dug it. But you get to a certain point where it's kind of like, oh, wait, well, yeah, this is really dumb. So, I mean, I guess for me as a Cloverfield movie, if you're invested in the franchise, you should definitely see it. I almost called it a franchise, guys. That should be a new term.
Franchise.
It works.
I don't know if Cloverfield has a big fan base, but
it has a huge fan base.
I'm pretty sure it does. Yeah.
I mean, that's why they were able to pull off this whole stunt to begin with. If this were just another random Netflix movie, if this was a futile and stupid gesture, which is one that just immediately comes to mind that they recently released, and they said, "Hey, guess what? You can tune in and watch it after the Super Bowl." People wouldn't give a fuck. The fact that it had the Cloverfield name. I bet you they could have done the same thing with like Stranger Things or like any of their like kind of like, I bet you could pick like 3 or 4 top marquees you could get there. This would fall under that. If this wasn't a Cloverfield movie, we wouldn't be having this conversation because it would have had probably a wet fart of a theatrical release. And we would have probably, if it wasn't a Cloverfield movie, we'd probably have been debating about whether or not we would even review it because we're not sure enough people would have watched it.
Right. I guess for me, I would recommend if you want a space thriller movie, watch Gravity instead with Sandra Bullock. But if you want a Cloverfield movie, go ahead and watch this thing. Guys, how do we feel about moving on to some spoilers so we can really dig into this topic?
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Spoilers for the Cloverfield Paradox. Not Paradot. Paradox are officially fair game. If you've not yet seen the film and you value your virginal innocence, now is your chance to step away as I awkwardly ramble for the next 20 seconds, giving you time to hit the pause button, the stop button, whatever you need to do to protect yourself. you have now missed your chance if you're still listening. Guys, I want to kick things off by asking a question in terms of the connective tissue between the films. So, Jim, you're laughing. Why are you laughing?
Because I have a question too. Maybe it's the same question, so go ahead.
All right. So my question is, at the end of the first Cloverfield movie, we see something crashing from space into like the bay off Manhattan. Is that the pod that the two characters from this movie go down to Earth in? I know it kind of looks like the monster like eats the pod. I wasn't totally clear, maybe. I don't know.
And I'll probably be proven wrong by someone who has some sort of like more comprehensive theory, but I think the link between between all the movies is that monsters appear. I don't know if I can, like, just based on the film that I watched, conceivably see that the first film and this one exist in the exact same universe, because this is one that's all based around this like looming war and this energy crisis and these kind of like heavy things that were not at all present in the first one. The first one was, hey, we're gonna go party with some friends, and then oh crap, a monster shows up. So I almost think that the idea behind this is we do see that within the Cloverfield in this particular movie that they punch a hole through dimensions and create these like kind of ripples through alternate dimensions. I almost would like to think that the Cloverfield ship caused all of this stuff to happen in all of these different alternate universes, including one where maybe there wasn't an energy shortage, which is like, you know, circa 2006 New York, whenever that first one took place. I can't. The story doesn't do a good enough job of jiving, so I don't know that I feel like letting them jive.
You know, Brad, that question was not my question, but it's an interesting one. It didn't even dawn on me to think that this thing that supposedly is in the last frames of the first movie coming out of the sky and splashing into the ocean or whatever would be the same capsule that's coming from the what's the name of the ship? What is it called?
The Shepherd.
The Shepherd. Oh, yeah. Coming down, and you know, then a monster appears. If so, I mean, great. That's fine. Maybe someday we'll get a Cloverfield movie that like actually makes this universe fucking make sense, and we'll have this huge eureka moment. Like, oh fuck, that's cool. Now I see how you know, alternate fucking universes on spaceships mean something. You know, because right now it's just a mishmash of shit. Like you said, we're worried about this, you know, planet Earth is going to shit because we don't have enough energy. I don't know what happened to wind and solar energy, but apparently we don't have any of that shit anymore.
I wonder what could have happened.
So now maybe we got this thing that's going to be this magic solution that's going to provide us all the energy we need. And that's, you know, somewhat interesting, I guess. But then things start happening on planet Earth, and we see this glimpse of, like, through the smoke, right, of a monster moving, and I'm getting kind of excited. Like, okay, I don't know what the monster has to do with an energy shortage and all the shit that's going on Earth, but and then of course at the end we get that shot, but I didn't really care about any of that stuff. My question was, what the fuck is the Cloverfield paradox, and why is it called that? Because at the end of the movie, I still don't know.
The paradox itself was something, and they flashed to a screen where some guy was like kind of doomsdaying the whole space project itself, and that's sort of what set it up, was the idea that instead of this basically this space-based Higgs boson creating all of this additional energy, that it had the capability of punching a hole through time and space and creating something that would ripple across and cause, I think the guy even says, like, who knows, it could even punch holes and make demons and monsters appear across all of time. It could create all.
Imagine that.
Yeah. He basically did the thing where he said the thing, like he was like, he had like a Cassandra thing because no one believed him. And what he said was actually 100% literally correct. And it was put there as sort of like a kind of a a lazy writer's way of explaining the things that happen in the film.
Yeah.
So that's what the paradox is, you know, this energy source would actually be the thing that can punch a hole through and cause all these things.
I got you. No, I get the idea of a paradox. I'm just wondering how it came to be called the Cloverfield. Did they call it the Cloverfield paradox in the movie? I think they did.
They did. Didn't he write a book or something about the Cloverfield project or something? And they were interviewing him about his book.
Yeah, he called it the Cloverfield paradox in that interview.
Yeah. So I think that's where that comes from. But I'm just so confused, I guess, about the time frames, because the other thing, the shelter that the guy and the little girl are in looked an awful lot like the shelter from 10 Cloverfield Lane. Was he texting John Goodman and asking if they could use his shelter? Is that why, like, you know, Help Me or whatever was like scratched on the inside of the window in that movie because they were stuck down there? I don't know.
I don't know. I thought the Help Me was scratched from the outside, but yeah.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure about that, but hey, you're right. I mean, I did see that scene where they showed the ladder going up through the escape like portal or whatever, and I had kind of flashbacks to that other movie. So, I mean, both of these movies were in a sense the second movie and this one were both like bottle episode movies, right? The 10 Cloverfield Lane taking place underground in the bunker. This one taking place primarily in the spaceship, but it did branch out to some scenes happening on Earth, which, to be honest, like that stuff on Earth, I don't know if it really mattered much to this story. Like it just seemed like I said, it was a story mess to me. Like I didn't understand the whole little girl scene unless she ties into something later on. I'm not sure.
The Earth stuff was the worst part of this film. And it's because it's the stuff that was there to make us suspect all through the movie. Like, I wonder what's going on. I wonder if there are monsters. I wonder if something's going on, only for us to get the kind of the reveal at the end that something is happening, you know? And that's all of it was just there. And it was presented that way because, you know, granted, Abrams didn't write this, but he did. His fingerprints are all over this. You know, I know he worked with Oren Uziel, who's the script writer here, to make sure that all of the Cloverfield stuff made its way in. It's all mystery box shit, you know, like the Abrams concept of I don't need to necessarily give answers, or I don't need to necessarily. It's not even that he doesn't want to give answers. It's that he doesn't necessarily care kind of what goes into the films as long as it makes people wonder what's going into them. And that becomes incredibly problematic for 3 films into a series when you're trying to titillate, when you're trying to get people excited about like what these questions are, but all it does is just leave like head scratching questions. I do very much like the intro to this film, like the setup for this film, the energy crisis and the characters all coming together and like kind of seeing some of their conflict. If you take all of the Earth stuff out and you focus just on that, I think this movie is a little tighter and it's a little better paced. And so I care about the characters in space more. I still have some issues with when the shit hits the fan, it's a little dull compared to some of these films that I've seen before. And I wanted to just see some more interesting things. But again, I like the setup. Like the first third of this movie had all of the trappings to be a movie that I would have gone absolutely crazy for.
Yeah. I just wish we'd gotten Chris O'Dowd naked. Is that too much to ask?
Not even shirtless. Really? Not even shirtless.
Not even. Armless. Not shirtless.
Yeah, armless.
He could take off his arm, but he couldn't take off his shirt. What the fuck was that all about?
Right. Like, you know, Monk gets to, or no, not Monk. What was the guy's name? Schmidt gets to be shirtless at the end of the movie. And I liked seeing his hair just a little bit. But like, Chris O'Dowd lost his fucking arm while they're trying to figure out what's going on with him. You'd think they might take his shirt off and, you know, do some tests. I don't know.
And that whole scene, I had real tonal issues with. I love Chris O'Dowd as an actor, and I think he can deliver comedy lines fine. But I had a problem with the whole comedic aspect right in the most dramatic part of the movie of, you know, the whole arm thing. Like, how many fucking detached arm jokes is he gonna make? is his character going to make in the movie? It was just I don't know. It was off-putting for me. That comedy didn't really work in that movie, or at least in that part of the movie.
It really didn't. And I get that that's why you bring in Chris O'Dowd, because he is incredibly funny. But there's two big cardinal sins that are committed with that character. Three, if you count him not being shirtless. So, Brad, I'll put that on the chart too.
Yes.
One of which is the fact that he doesn't get a chance to like experience like any of the terror. Like he seems like he's kind of riffing and laughing through things after you can see his arm fucking severed and like it's moving around by itself and you can see the striations of his body. And I know he says it doesn't hurt, but still, like, that's a terrifying thing. If that were me, I would be freaking the fuck out, and for a while too. The other cardinal sin is that they at no point had him trying to fix this laser. He's the tech guy, right? Mm-hmm. He's one of the tech guys. At no point does he suggest turning it off and turning it back on again. That was a fucking crime.
And that could have even been a good joke.
That's where you get the humor. That is a great time. You could have had that joke. And then by the time the arm thing happens, the stakes are going up. And so comedic diversion at that point, it needs to either release tension. And that's not what it does here. In this case, it like just turns the tension off entirely. So yeah, if you want to use Chris O'Dowd, use him a little bit more. Like, I was not a fan of the last Alien movie. Alien, was it Resurrection?
Alienation? I don't remember.
Yeah, whatever the last Alien movie was called. I was not a big fan of that one, all in all. But what I did like was I feel like they used a funny man in that, Danny McBride, and he did have some comedic stuff. But they also let him play up like fear and loss and anger and all of these other things a lot more effectively than they let O'Dowd do. Covenant. Ben Stark said, Covenant. Alien Covenant. Yes.
Alien Covenant. Yep. And you're right, Will. I mean, the other thing I didn't really work for me is they tried to put an emotional, kind of an emotional pull in this movie with the lead character. What's her name? Gugu. I forget what her the actress is. Yeah.
Hamilton.
Yeah, and it, with her family back on Earth, and or in the alternate universe or whatever.
I'm calling it the mirror universe.
Yeah, I know, it's weird, right? We having just watched the finale of Star Trek Discovery Season 1, which...
Careful of spoilers.
Yeah, I won't spoil it. But I can say I've had... to have this movie show us alternate universes, like, I was like, really? We're doing this, I guess. I don't know. It was strange. It's a lot of alternate universe stuff. And I'm like, I got to wonder... Well, I can't talk about it without spoiling stuff, so I'm not gonna. But I'll just say the emotional stuff that happened with that character, I know it was supposed to be kind of the emotional center of the movie. It just didn't really hold much emotion for me.
And I think that's because of how it was presented. Because the story itself, if I were just to say, we're in spoilers, a woman who has lost her children in a tragic way now has the ability to potentially damn her own world and go to a different alternate dimension as a result of that, where her kids are still alive. That is rife with drama. Like, just on paper, I'm here for that story.
Yeah.
Like, I want to see it. But the problem we get is we don't get enough time with her really, like, getting to see the character really owning kind of that, kind of that loss earlier in the film. Yep. There's a drop, like there's a line that she drops.
It's exposition.
Yeah, like it's like, oh, would we still go up there if they were still here? No, I'm still, like that. There's some lines, but covering yourself with the script, like by throwing in a couple of lines here and there, is not the same as developing emotional resonance that carries through the film. And so by the time she has to make this fateful decision, I didn't care about it because I didn't feel like the movie wanted to make me care about it. I could intellectually understand what her decision was, but emotionally, like I wasn't gripped the way I should have been. And again, This is an amazing actress who has given us one of the most gripping performances that any of the three of us have ever seen in San Junipero, you know? And again, the same thing with this entire cast. Everyone here is so good and comes from so many different walks of life, and every single one of them is brilliant. Ji Zhang, and I'm probably butchering that. She's great. She was in like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Hero, and Memoirs of a Geisha. You know, this is a very accomplished actress who I felt like tried to be more than one note, but the script would never really allow her to do any of that. And that's a problem. That's a real problem when you waste this caliber of cast on this caliber of script.
Part of it for me was, I mean, how many fucking space science fiction movies have we seen the crew member sitting in front of the display crying over family that was like on Earth or whatever? Like, that's been done to death. And it's just, unless you come up with something novel to present that and maintain its emotional gut punch, it's not working. It's just
would it have been better for you, Jim, if it was like a family space station? Like the family could have come up with her and something she did on the station got them sucked into space?
I don't know. I don't know what they could have done. I'm not a movie writer. I just know what worked for me. And at this point, I've seen that so many times. I'm like, okay, we're going to be sad now because her family's there and something bad's happening and she can't get to them. Or I don't know. It's just, it's very cliched at this point. It's become almost, I don't know what you call it, a meme or whatever. We could probably do a whole show on movies of people sitting in front of display screens on spaceships and crying.
We'll do a super space cut.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, though, like, even though I've seen it a bunch of times, I have been moved by that type of thing before.
If it's done right. If it's done right.
We could have been moved by it here, but we weren't because, I mean, that's just a writing issue. I mean, it all comes back to that. The way the story is presented is problematic from an emotional resonance perspective. And also the fact that we keep dropping out and doing this more or less unrelated subplot on Earth with her husband.
Yep.
I think that kills any pacing that might have happened otherwise. I mean, this movie is probably an hour and 20 minutes if you chop all of that shit out. And I think that I'm probably not in love with it, but I'm probably a little bit more positive on it if it was just, I can deal with a, like not exciting sci-fi movie if at least it's brisk. But the fact that it did drag out a little bit because of those scenes on Earth just made it all that harder for me to like be positive about.
Mm-hmm. Brad, you brought up go ahead. You brought up the Mark Duplass series Togetherness earlier. It's funny you did because John Ortiz is in this movie, and that's the tie-in that we have. The monk character in this was prominent in that series, and I like that guy. I like that guy a lot. They didn't really do much with him here, unfortunately.
Indeed, unfortunately. Well, guys, we are going to look to wrap this show up. I know you guys in Texas, it's like in the future there. So, and Jim, you've got an early morning. Let's go ahead. We're going to put a pretty bow on the Cloverfield paradox and transition to some plugs. This is the part of the show where we put something on your radar we think is interesting, something you may want to see, something that excited us that we want to impart onto you. Jim, what have you got this week?
Well, I've watched a bunch of movies, but I'm going to plug a series on also on Netflix. It's available now on Netflix called Planet Earth 2. If you haven't, the first Planet Earth series, and these are awesome, like maybe 5 1-hour episodes, 5 or 6 1-hour episodes. The first season came out 10 years ago in 2000. Well, actually more than that, I think 2006, I think. So it's like 10 or 12 years ago. And this is the second one. There, like I said, there's 5 or 6 episodes. Each one is set in a different ecosystem, like grasslands, the desert, the jungle, the ocean, blah, 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 all that stuff. But just fantastic there's at least a dozen like, oh my fucking god, wow, like shots and moments in each of these episodes to watch. So check it out. It's called Planet Earth 2. It's definitely worth a watch, and it's something you don't even really have to be like glued to the TV to watch, really, but or glued to the screen to watch. But it's definitely worth it. David Attenborough is a fantastic. Just his voice alone in narrating these is great, and the photography. If you got a big, 4K or high def TV, put this thing on and really enjoy it. Especially if you're an animal lover like I am, it's great.
In the scope of nature documentaries, I have to say, Jim, I haven't seen the whole series with you, but what I have seen so far, I've been super impressed by. Usually nature documentaries put me the fuck to sleep, but I don't know, something about David Attenborough's voice and watching, lions jump and attack giraffes. It's pretty compelling stuff.
Yeah. We've come a long way since Marlon Perkins and Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom.
Absolutely. Well, what have you got?
I'm in a similar boat right now, Jim. Like, I've been doing a lot of like movie catch up, including a lot of the foreign language nominations, but I know that those are not trickling out to a lot of theaters right now. So I'm actually going to hold off on plugging those and maybe just mention them when we do our Oscar show or something. So instead, I'm going to plug something that you can watch, everyone can watch right now. And it's also a television series, and it's also on Netflix. I don't know how I missed it, but I did not get in on the ground floor of The Good Place, which is just wrapped up at season 2. I was on a trip recently, and I needed something to watch on the plane and just kind of to download in advance and watch on the, kind of as I'm hanging around the hotel room. So I marathoned all of season 1 and season 2 of The Good Place this week, and holy crap, is it good. The premise is you've got Kristen Bell as this woman who is a sort of arrogant, self-indulgent woman who dies and somehow ends up in the good place, heaven or whatever you want to call it. And where everybody else, including her friends, or the friends that she meets there, are all these remarkably amazing people. And she has to
justify herself.
She has to kind of stay on the down low so that they don't realize that she sort of like faked her way, kind of stumbled into it, while also trying to legitimately like turn around and be good. And the premise for it, I'd heard that and I thought, okay, well, whatever. I've heard of a few shows like that, whatever. And I skipped it. I wrongly skipped this show. And in watching it, I found out that this show is so much more than that. And it actually does a few things, which I will not mention here, that are ballsy as fuck. Like, I have seen very few shows that have been this willing to shake up its own formula to further the narrative. I can't think of very many shows at all that have made as bold a move as this weird little 30-minute sitcom comedy has done. So it's called The Good Place. Season 1 is on Netflix. Season 2 will be soon. It just wrapped, so it's in that thing where you can watch it on like iTunes or Amazon, and it'll be on Netflix eventually anyway. But it is so freaking good, you guys.
I've heard good things about The Good Place, Will, and I hope to catch up on it. How many hours, real quick, how many hours of investment have you made in it for season 1 and 2?
So there are 27 episodes, and each one is 22 minutes long. So, I mean, you can watch this over the course of, what does that work out to? Like 10-ish hours, give or take?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, 10 to 15 hours, yeah.
Will, a question. Does The Good Wife go to The Good Place?
So that's part of why I skipped it at first. I had nothing against The Good Wife. I'd never watched it. But I when I first heard this thing had come out, I thought it was a spinoff. I thought this was The Good Wife, and then there was The Good Wife, and then there was a spinoff called The Good Something, and I don't remember what it is. And then I heard about The Good Place. I didn't know what this series was even about at first. I thought it was just another thing in that universe when I heard people talking about it. Like, okay, great. I don't want to watch a series that's a spinoff of a spinoff.
So it's not It's not a sequel to Good Burger.
It is not. It is not. It is a standalone thing. You can watch all of it in, a few hours. I mean, granted, it's 27 episodes. Ted Danson is in it, and he is so freaking good.
Looking forward
to it. Well, for me this week, after the whole 50 Shades discussion, binging some of those movies. Yes, that was a cattail going across my camera, as I mentioned for Chiz.
A cat of one tail.
A cat of one tail. I wanted to seek out something sort of critically applauded when it comes to sort of taking a look at the kink lifestyle. So I did a little research. I'd seen Secretary in the past with James Spader, which I thought was good, but there was a documentary in 2013 produced by James Franco all about the website kink.com. The documentary is called Kink. And basically, without spoiling anything, it centers around this studio that produces kink porn videos. And a lot of the performers and directors and people that they interview for the documentary talk about the kink phenomenon and why people get into things like BDSM and what it does for them and how it helps them. But what was really interesting to me is the movie starts off and you see them shooting some scenes, but you don't see anything. And I'm like, oh, here we go. Christian Grey and Anna, softcore, documentary, whatever. And then all of a sudden there's a giant schlong, smacking around another giant schlong. And I'm like, wait, what? What am I watching here? Yeah, there was a lot of nudity and sex that you can see happening and all kinds of crazy stuff. And it's I'm not really a fan of documentaries in general, but I thought it was a very well done documentary. I feel like I learned a lot. It was just really interesting to me, in a documentary you can watch on Amazon Prime, to see so much nudity and real sex happening. My question is, though, I know there's a lot of controversy around Franco. Is it weird for you guys that he produced a documentary around BDSM porn?
I mean, he also was the person that spearheaded Interior Leather Bar, right?
Yeah, right. I'm starting to put some breadcrumbs even further together. Maybe, I don't know.
There's been some criticism of Franco that, and I don't know where I fall on it. I just want to see people producing interesting things, and I think that he does. So I'm cool there. But I think there's some criticism that he's sort of doing the sort of exploiting the gay community by sort of putting on the equivalent of, and I don't know of a better word for it, and this is not the kind of queer blackface, the equivalent of playing in our space to pretend to be part of us, but as not part of us. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know how to parse that criticism, to be honest.
Right.
Well,
right.
Stink of Franco aside, it's a great documentary. I definitely think it's worth checking out. If you're interested in, BDSM, maybe you saw a 50 Shades of Grey movie, it piqued your interest. Definitely check out this documentary. Just be prepared for all the dicks that will come flying at your face from the TV screen. Don't be taken by surprise.
Is this movie sort of like when you open up one of those cans of snakes and just the snakes come flying out,
it kind of that, but dicks. It kind of is. And one of the things I really like is it doesn't come across like a commercial for the website, which was my fear. Sure. You know what I mean? It doesn't do that, which is nice. But yes, all the dicks flying at you all the time. Some vagina too, but
How's it available?
It's available on Amazon Prime for streaming and on DVD.
And in 3D 4K?
I don't know about that.
4D? 4D?
Way more than 4Ds, Jim.
It is interesting, though. I went to the website just to kind of click around after seeing the documentary. Or was it dick around? I don't know. But they have a whole VR channel when they produce true VR porn or something, which I guess I didn't really realize was a super big thing.
So you can have a dick slapped in your face virtually.
I was going to say, I guess if you want, you probably could. you know. But
great. Now we know what like the next like 8 plugs Brad's gonna bring to the show are. Like, okay, so I downloaded a new. Okay, Brad, no.
Oh man. All right. Well, guys, this has been a fun show. Want to give a quick shout out to everyone who's hanging out with us tonight in the live chat. Sammy and Fire, Ragnar, Bill, Ben, I'm Austin. I'm doing my, romper room thing. Jim, I see you smiling. But we sure love having you guys hang out with us. Sometimes that chat moves pretty quick. We don't get to every comment, but we love reading through the conversation. Great having you with us. Big shout out as well to those of you who are accessing the show on YouTube. You're watching the video version of the show. Hopefully you enjoy some of the joys of doing the show live before Jim so lovingly edits and post-produces the show for iTunes and Stitcher. Guys, this is our 270th episode, which is so awesome. We have folks who've been listening since episode 1, not the bad Star Wars movie, but like our actual first episode in 2012. Thank you for being with us. We sure do love and appreciate you guys. We will see you all next week. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.